And we're live.
Hello, Will.
Hello.
Welcome back to Leafy Learning Chats.
Yes, this is the second episode, I suppose, isn't it?
I guess so, yeah.
And you had more success than you expected from the first one.
I was absolutely flabbergasted. I didn't think anyone would be interested in what I've got to say at all, so thank you very much.
Almost 1,000 likes on TikTok. We've had a few, I think we're on 4,000 views on YouTube now. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for tuning in, guys.
You've probably racked up about 10,000 views in the last 2 weeks.
Bonkers,
it's a bit crazy.
Absolutely bonkers.
Never thought you'd talk to a stadium full of people.
You put it like that, it's quite scary. Yeah.
So, I need to ask you some questions.
Yeah, because that would really help get the ball rolling.
So, I suppose since we last spoke, what have you been working on? What have you been doing? That's probably a good place to start.
I've been talking to, what have I been up to? I've been talking to a couple of different people regarding working in the new area that I'm going to be working to. Sorry, there's just a tiny little bird on the roof just up there. I get distracted so easily. That is so tiny. Is it a wren? Anyway, sorry. Yes, what have I been up to? Apart from getting distracted by every bit of wildlife that comes past, I have been talking to a lady. I'm going to work next week up in the new area that I'm going to be moving to, to, I don't know, get to know some people up there, which is really good for networking. Do a day's work, which is always handy for a day's pay, so that's exciting. A new environment. She works from her land, which is basically her garden. She's got a bell tent. She's set up like a stay and play, and this is obviously a holiday club for 5 to 11-year-olds. And then out the back gate and into some woodlands and a pond over in Caesar's Camp, which is in Surrey. So
Nice.
It'd be interesting to see what that's all about.
Yeah. Feel free to talk to me. I'm over here.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forget, don't I? And then I've also been I've booked on a conference. I can't remember whether I said this last time. Towards the end of April, which is Surrey Outdoor Learning and Development. SOLD, it's called. Over at High Ashurst, which is an outdoor centre.
Cool.
And
again, that's over in Surrey?
It's over in Surrey, just on the borders, and near Dorking. And hopefully do a bit of networking and also see some guest speakers and booked into workshops and things like that, which is always good to keep you up to date with what's going on in the world and to see other people's viewpoints. So
nice. So if you had to summarise in like 5 quick points for a 1 minute short,
what have I been up to?
What have you been up to?
I have been networking with a new person, and I'm going to work next week in a garden and Caesar's Camp, and then I've booked myself into a conference which has got some workshops and guest speakers.
Nice. There you go. Just have to try and get these short form things in as well. Try and remember also it's just having a conversation, so don't worry about the cameras. They're just
I look straight ahead of me, not even look at the camera.
So I suppose I found my questions that I was going to ask you.
Okay.
You've been delivering in the past to SEND children.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain to us what is SEND?
So what is SEND? SEND is Special Educational Needs and Disabilities.
Right.
So I was working with a branch of the council which work with children with additional needs and their families. And so that's what SEND is. It's Special Educational Needs and Disabilities is what it stands for. And in pretty much everything I write, I use that shorthand because obviously special educational needs and disabilities is quite a long thing to say.
So I'd heard of SEND before. That's obviously maybe...
the educational needs, so the autism, the ADHD, that side of it.
Yeah.
This is also disability as well, so physical or mental disabilities as well.
Okay, interesting. And what are the differences so taking it back to Forest School, sort of what are the differences between running a SEND session versus running a session with neurotypical children?
Okay, well done for saying neurotypical. The differences between working with neurotypical children and SEND children would be the range of activities and how you adapt those activities. We very much focus on the senses. When we're working with SEND children, we quite often have a trail, for example, and that trail could include lots of things to smell along the way.
So for SEND children, you'd build a trail.
Yes, so we'd lay a trail. We'd have a walkway that is accessible. So especially if we've got wheelchair users, we make it an accessible walk. We avoid things like rabbit holes and big tree roots. So we make the trail through the woods that is an accessible trail. So physically that's accessible. and then we would make it. We would make the trail a sensory trail, or we could make it a visual trail where we can lay things like flour on the floor, like normal household baking flour.
Yeah.
And it's quite bright because it's white against the dark of the mud. So we would lay that trail, and it could be in the shape of a paw print or something, or then we could use sticks and we could in the shape of arrows or something like that. So, but I've also rubbed garlic on tree trunks and lemon on tree trunks.
For the smell.
So you literally go from tree trunk to tree trunk sniffing to find out which way to go on the trail. So if you sniff 3 trees and one of them's got the garlic, you then go to the next tree and see which one's got the garlic, and keep going all the way through the woodlands until you get to quite often the ingredients for what we're cooking that day.
That's a good idea. So to summarise that, say, what would you do on a trail for SEND children? It would be...
A trail for SEND children would be quite often a sensory trail using the senses. We would make sure it's an accessible trail, but we would use the senses, for example, smell, and we would add things like garlic, lemon, basil, or something that is growing in the forest at that particular time of year to add to a tree trunk to make the trail from one tree to the next.
Nice. Sorry if I'm getting you to like reiterate things.
No,
I'm thinking about the
good.
short clips.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we've covered what is SEND, covered what are the differences between SEND and other sessions you run.
I guess I could add to the differences between a neurotypical
So what would you do in a neurotypical session versus...
So all I've spoken about so far is adding a trail to my sessions. When we're doing fire, especially with children with disabilities, perhaps if they've got limited mobility, in my neurotypical sessions, we would have them kneeling on the floor on a kneeling mat within the fire circle, and lighting with a fire steel into a shell on the floor.
Right.
Obviously, if you've got a child with restricted mobility, you've got to have that accessible. So we have obviously logs of various heights, so quite often they can be moved, or we've got little tables that we can pull in next to a wheelchair, or 2 logs next to each other so they can use that height. When we have children with, for example, visual impairment, which we do work with children with Wild Vision Project, we make sure that there's an adult per child. So we have extra adults in.
So you've got that extra ratio.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think that's basic adaptations. If we are doing any other sort of craft, again, it's having that higher adult ratio than we would normally, where we've gone from 2 adults to 15 children. We might now have 5 adults, or we might have their parents or other assistants to help.
Nice. That's good. And I suppose the assistants as well, are they qualified assistants, or are these just additional? So
we always, when we run our SEND sessions, we always have 2 fully qualified forest school leaders.
For how many kids?
For up to 15. However, a lot of the SEND sessions I've done recently have been with families.
Yeah.
So there's been 1 or 2 children plus their adult. It could be their carer or their parents. So actually, we've quite often had 6 or 7 adults to perhaps 4 children.
Okay.
So there's definitely been enough adults, for 1 adult per child.
Yeah. Very good. Good answer. So that, I suppose, you'll almost be reiterating what we've said in the differences between the 2 sessions. But my next question is, what goes into a plan for a SEND session?
Okay. So when I'm planning, I look at the time of year. So we think about the seasonal activities for that session. I can talk about seasons in a different video.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you think of the weather conditions, we think of the season. Then when we've got the rough idea of, what the weather's going to be doing, because if we know it's going to be a very cold session, we choose activities where we keep the children active. Whereas if it's a hot, sunny session, we choose activities where they can sit in the shade and be cool. So it really does affect what you plan according to the weather. So really, I
suppose also like windy trees, branches falling down.
I was going to say, then we look at the weather, if it's even suitable to have that session.
Right.
So when you're planning your session, obviously you will have a contingency plan.
Yeah.
Is it that we need to put up extra shelters because we know it's going to be wet? Is it that we have to keep a very close eye on it, the weather regarding wind, and then possibly warn our clients that we have to cancel due to high wind, or possibly move the session out of the woods to a field area where branches aren't going to fall on your head, and then make kites or something that uses the wind. So in terms of planning a session, the first thing we look at is the season and the weather. Once we've got the season and the weather in our brains, we can then start the activities. I would never choose clay on a really cold day because their hands get really cold and wet. Then we always build in a fire and a cooking activity. We always have a craft activity, a natural craft, and we always have something physical. So if you think of how children are, generally, you've got active children, you've got creative children, and you've got food, and that's normally a winner.
Yeah.
So you've got something for everybody, especially if you don't know your client group. You've got 15 children you don't know very well. You're hoping that having that range, that breadth of something physical, something creative, and something to eat, you're going to encourage all those children to all or one of those aspects within the session.
Yeah. Interesting. So if you had to say your favourite go-to craft activity,
I would probably say elder, using elder to make beads, or elder pencils, because on pretty much every site that I work in and around Sussex has elder. It's considered a weed, so nobody minds if you're cutting it back, and it's accessible for most children to make a pencil or poke the centre of because the thing about elder is it has a soft pith, which you can push out with a tent peg or a stick. And that's really accessible for most people to be able to do, and it's actually quite fun as well.
Nice. And in terms of you said there are three main pillars. There was the crafts, there was the fire, and there's doing something physical.
Yeah.
What would you do in terms of an activity for fire? Would that be like gathering items to start the fire, or would you already do that ahead of time, or would it depend on the...
If it's a wet session, we still get them to collect wood, because we like to teach them what types of wood to collect. For example, elder that we've just spoken about is great for beads, but actually you don't want to be burning that because it can, when it's burnt, it releases cyanide toxin. So you don't want to be having that in the air.
No.
And it upsets the fairies as well, if you like your folklore. So it's really good for us to say, okay, go and collect some wood and then sort it out. Even if it's wet and we're not going to use it that day, it's still a really good activity to teach them what's good for firewood, what's not.
Yeah. You would take wood that you'd already collected previously that was dry.
Especially if it was wet, we always take a bag of kindling and a bag of logs with us so that we've got that there. It's apparently, is that better?
Yeah, that's very good.
So in terms of fire, we would always start every activity. Quite often when we pick up the children, we pick them up from a car park or on the edge of a woodland, etc. And there's a couple of minutes walk on the way to the fire circle. So on that walk, you can say, well, let's look for firewood.
Right.
Or if you've got a few children arriving while you're waiting for others, let's look for things that would be great for the fire. Are there any pine cones? Are there any little twigs that we can pick up?
Yeah.
Every session for me is when we're having fire, which is, I would say 90% of the sessions I run, I have a fire.
Right.
With a purpose. I won't have one on really hot days. There's just no point in having them burning unnecessarily, carbon dioxide in the air, etc. But if we're cooking, which, as I say, for me, it's quite a staple within my sessions to cook something, so we will have a fire. Always start a session collecting firewood, sorting firewood, building the fire, depending on the age of the children, whether we decide to have one large campfire or whether they choose to have smaller campfires. We can have them in a Kelly kettle base or on a metal tin or something, and we can have 2 or 3 little fires, again with that adult ratio. If we've got SEND children, we would definitely only have one fire because we can't keep our eyes on many.
20 fires.
And also if you've got a child with autism or ADHD and you don't know what their fire circle safety is going to be like, if you've got one fire, at least you can always have an adult on that fire and know. Whereas if you've got multiple fires, one adult might have their back to one particular fire because you've got multiple. So obviously we try not to do that, but it could happen. So it's a lot easier to manage just one.
Yeah, definitely. And then my final thing of those 3 pillars would be, so we've craft, fire, and now something physical. What would the physical activity be?
So again, all of our sites have got suitable trees for pushing up rope swings. So we'd always have a rope swing.
Very cool.
We have also one of those, I want to say a basket swing. I hope you know what you mean by that. It's a giant thing you put 2 kids on. So we can put a carabiner on that and hook that up.
So you take that with you to the session?
We've actually got one that we take with us on the session. But if we haven't got that one, it's a simple log swing we can knock up with a rope. But it's always checking your trees, checking there's no hanging branches that have fallen in the last wind that are still hanging above your head. Checking that the trees around you are still living, a great way of learning that is obviously if they've got leaves on coming into the spring, and over the winter they haven't. So it's about your tree ID, knowing if it's strong enough. Is that branch thicker than your wrist? Is it thicker than, your thigh or whatever it is? What are the age of the children? What type of swing you're putting up? Is your rope still suitable? Has it got any frayed parts to it? There's also 2 types of rope. So you've got static rope and dynamic rope. Static rope doesn't have any give in it. It's like what I call it, what looks like string rope. So it's made of size.
Some of these for like big boats.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you've got all the climbing ropes that most people get hold of. You can even get them in places like H&M Home Bargains and all that sort of thing.
So usually nylon.
It can be nylon. Yeah, it can be nylon, but they have a slight elasticity to them. A lot of really good professionals won't use those for swings. They use the traditional ropes. Having said that, more and more of us are using the cheaper nylon ropes because that's all they can get hold of. But it's just being aware that there is a slight give and a slight bounce to them. Yeah. So when you're putting it at a certain height, it may well drop. And over time it will as well. And then also it's your knots, making sure that you know the right type of knots. There are right knots and wrong knots. However, there's not one correct knot. There are many different ways of putting up a swing. It all depends on what you've got.
And is it the kids you get to tie those knots, then you just check them, or do you tie the knots?
No, with swings, we always get the trained adults to put them, and we always get the adult to try the swing first as well.
Nice.
Not just because we want to have fun, but, safety. And if we are at a site where we can leave the swing up at the start of every session, we would still check.
Yeah.
Most of the time we have to take the swings down, so it's a fresh start anyway. Other physical activities we've got other than swings, we can make bridges between 2 trees, so rope bridge, a low rope and a high rope, and we've also got a slack line as well that we can put up. And obviously once the children do get a bit more adventurous, you might be able to then make a bit of an assault course with those ropes, having swings. And our latest one is a bit of a gladiator run, because the reruns of Gladiator, which is a recent thing. So assault courses on logs, on fallen trees.
Yeah. And this is, I would say, a dry weather activity because logs get slippy.
Exactly that. Yeah. Exactly that. The swings are okay in the wet if they're not being stood on, obviously. Yeah. But yeah, anything that you're walking on wet wood, we just don't. We have got a couple of trees that we can climb as well. And again, when it's wet, or if the ground is still very muddy, when their shoes are going to get wet and then climb, we say no climbing on those climbing trees at that time.
Got you. And I know you said there's not a particularly hard, fast, correct knot, but just in case anyone's wondering, do you have a preferred knot to use when making swings? Well, I use a bow to tie my shoes, so that's about as much knowledge as I have on knots. So
in terms of knots, we'll talk about knots at a different time, and I'll actually demonstrate some.
Yeah, I know there's a figure of 8 knot. I know that's one. Is that also called the hangman knot? Or is that a different knot again?
No, I don't think so.
That's
a Prusik knot's a pretty good knot to learn, and a trucker's hitch is really good at tightening.
Say that again,
rope.
Sorry?
A Prusik knot.
Prusik knot.
Yeah. And a trucker's hitch is really helpful for tightening those rope bridges to get it really, really tight. But as I say, we'll talk knots another time.
Yeah, nice. Let me pull up my other list of questions. Very prepared.
So we've covered.
So that was the 3 main pillars.
Typical activities in a session. We've got fire, and we would introduce how to collect the right wood for the fire, sort the fire, build the fire. And then obviously we'd do managing the fire and extinguishing the fire and leaving no trace. So that's one sort of activity that runs throughout the session right from start to finish.
So in terms of extinguishing the fire, what are you bringing with you to do that? And are you prefacing the session with sort of saying to the kids, we're going to put this out? So
again, depending on the weather conditions, if it's a really, really dry floor because you've had no rain in summer, etc., we would probably have a fire pit, so off the ground.
Okay.
But many of my sites where we do have fires on the ground in a dedicated area. If we do have the little fires that I was talking about in the little tins, again, I might even wet the ground first and I certainly wouldn't do it on any grass or dry grass because of the risk of a fire spreading.
Yeah.
I forgot what the question
It was just sort of what do you bring? What do you prepare?
Yeah. So obviously we'll have water.
Yeah.
We always have.
So it's water over sand because obviously you don't want to leave a lasting impact.
No, exactly that. We always just have water for our extinguishing our fires. We quite often make a bit of a ceremony of it at the end of every session as well. So we gather all the children together. We built the fire together, so we put the fire out together. So we will scoop up a little cup full of water from a big bucket and we'd give it to each child. Each child would come in, pour a cup full of water on the fire and perhaps say their favourite part of the day or be grateful and have some gratitude for something on that session or that day.
So it makes it like a social activity to bring everyone back together
absolutely,
as well.
which is really important. Yeah. It also gives every opportunity for every child to have a voice. Even the quiet ones don't mind pouring on and don't mind saying the word, marshmallows at the end if they've had a favourite thing. It just gets them the confidence to speak in public as well. So it's always a good activity to do.
And it doesn't feel like that's what they're doing. It just feels like they're just pouring some
ending
water on the fire and shouting marshmallows.
Yeah. And as I say, we would never force them to do it and we would never force them to say anything. It's just part of the ending, the closing, and it feels like a closure then. Because if they're playing on the swing and all of a sudden say, okay, kids, time to go, it doesn't feel like the end to them. So if putting out the fire, extinguishing that fire, and then watching us clear away those embers, the bits of charcoal, scatter some leaves back over so that it looks like there's not been a fire there. It obviously deters people that may not have good intentions of lighting fires in the woods anyway, but it's also good for nature. One thing that people have mentioned, and in the level 3 training, it's mentioned quite often, is when you repeatedly have a fire in the same location on the ground, you are changing the soil chemistry. You are adding the charcoal and the ash, so it adds different chemicals to the mud. So you have to be mindful of that. As I say, you can use a fire pit, so you're not putting the embers on the ground. You can dig up the soil and put the soil over the top, but obviously that's damaging as well. So it's about just being mindful of the ecology and what area you're doing this and how frequently, and are you having fire in exactly the same spot? So you're only damaging 1 square metre of that woodland rather.
Is that what you'd recommend? You'd recommend only damaging one square metre
where you keep it the same all the time
versus maybe changing the location every session?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. But also it's about how sensitive your site is. If you've got an exceptionally sensitive site, just never put it on the floor anyway. Just have a fire pit raised off the floor. But yeah, it depends on your landowner's permission and all sorts of things. But it's just something.
I'm going to throw you a wacko question, which you definitely weren't prepared an answer for. Is there a favourite brand of fire pit for anyone that's looking to start running?
Oh, I can't remember the name of it, but there's the ones that I've always.
Is there a particular shop that you went to get it, or?
I bought it on the internet.
Bought it on the internet. Nice.
But a 50, 60, 70 or 80 centimetre fire pit. It's a German make. It's quite shallow.
Okay.
What you don't really want to be getting is a very deep fire pit, especially if you want children to, for example, cook marshmallows, because when your fire is burnt down to embers, that's when you want to cook. Your fire is very low down within a high dish, and that dish is going to be hot. So you don't want the children's arms anywhere near a bit of metal that's quite deep to get near to the fire.
That's
so
a good top
shallow,
tip.
Wide bowl is preferable.
Perfect. Good answer. Here's a question. Let's take it back to your why. Why do you provide SEND sessions in addition to neurotypical sessions? It keeps falling down. I need to get
repurpose my microphone. So the reason we went into SEND was because we'd run we'd run family sessions with up to 20 families, and we would quite often get an email just beforehand saying, how busy is it going to be? Are my children welcome? And will they be able to access physically the site and physically the activities that you're providing? Yeah, I think so. So we started thinking about why we would provide SEND sessions, and it was predominantly to enable all children to access the woodland in a safe space, so that, excuse me, sorry, I had a bit of a burp there. So all children can access Forest School, and without any judgment from other families as well. So these families with children with additional needs were quite often feeling quite ostracised from groups because the behaviour of some of the children was quite different to neurotypical.
It'd be difficult to find people who understand the
exactly. And some children that are neurotypical don't understand why certain children behave in a certain way.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to segregate, but we wanted to build up a community that was supportive. So we started with just allowing the SEND families with their siblings who quite often, were neurotypical. So the families were aware of the child's need. The children would then get comfortable with the space. It also coincided with COVID, which meant that the only way we could actually deliver was with one family bubble at the time as well. So we would have one family attending an outside activity, so the children would get used to us as a new person, the space, which was a new space, the activities and the kind of structure that we had, or lack of structure, if you like. We had all these activities, but you could choose how you do them, when you do them. Then as restrictions lifted, we introduced up to 3 families per session that, again, they all had at least one child with an additional need, but they had some siblings that were neurotypical. So what we were doing was building those children's relationships with other children. The siblings understood because they already had someone in their family that had an additional need. The SEND children themselves were perhaps seeing somebody that was either similar to them or different, but had needs, and they could see that they struggled in another way. And the community was built, basically. And
was it inclusive in terms of everyone would work together, or did you find that maybe, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but do you, the SEND children tend to hang out with the other SEND children, or do the
really
neurotypical
varies.
tend to stay with the neurotypical, or do they all just mix?
It really varies. So in each of our sessions, bearing in mind we did it for 4 years, a lot of our families became, in each session, we only had an hour and a half, but we gave the same families to the same group, so they all got to know each other really well. So initially they would perhaps stay with their own family, so they were all 3 separate families moving around the activities. But gradually, as the parents got to know each other, gradually as we started cooking together, we would say, right, today we're going to make a cake. And 2 or 3 of the children were like, wow, let's go and make a cake. This sounds really exciting. Or even just simple as come and butter some toast. When they were at the table together buttering toast, they would share knives. They would help each other with jam. And it was just little tiny things like that they got to know each other. Waiting for turns in the swing. Can you push me on the swing? Little tiny things that gradually built their community. And it was across the ages. So we had from, tiny tots really, right up to 18, 19-year-olds with additional needs. Families with 3 or 4 children, perhaps all neurodiverse. And the adults would come, and some of them, the neurodiverse people really did need a lot of input from adults, some less so.
Right.
And some just loved exploring the space, and you could watch from a distance, knowing that they were safe because parents knew where the boundaries were, and you could see them in the distance, and it was fine. So it was over time, through the activities, through having the same families visit this every month. This was one of the projects we've run with SEND. They got to know each other and they felt safe, and so, to answer your question, neurotypical and neurodiverse children mixed with everybody after a while.
Nice. Good. And I think that also speaks to the importance of not having a one-off session, having multiple sessions in series, maybe once a week, that everyone can attend and build up those relationships with kids with similar...
I mean, the range of need that we have in our SEND sessions is huge. It's literally... as I say, we have autism, we have ADHD, but we also have muscular dystrophy. We have, oh my goodness, my memory. But many, many different types of disabilities.
I know you do ADHD, autism.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But we've got...
Cerebral palsy, have you had?
We haven't got cerebral palsy, but I'm trying to think. There's a young lady with quite profound needs.
Right.
And she can only communicate through a board, like an interactive iPad type thing.
Right.
And initially, the other children that can communicate verbally were a little unsure how to involve her, as were we. But over time, we've built the relationships up with the young lady, and the
it's
other
just
children.
familiarity, I suppose.
Exactly. And realising that everyone can communicate in their own way. And although physically she couldn't access some of the things, over time we realised that we really loved playing a game with a ball that was a jingly ball, basically, and we put it at the foot of somebody who stood in the middle. It's a bit like a creeping game to who somebody should nick the ball.
Right.
And she joined in on that game, and she would laugh and love the fact that we could get involved with that. And I think with my inexperience, I would suggest that I wouldn't have played that with that particular age of children, thinking that it wouldn't be something that they would enjoy because they were too old. But it wasn't the case at all. With their needs that they had, they got the enjoyment from the creeping still and the enjoyment from succeeding and hiding and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And it's taught me a lot. I've really valued learning all that I have through working with all these families. And I have to say the parents are phenomenal. Not only are they great at supporting their own child and other people's children, they are great at communicating the needs of their children and helping us to understand the needs of their children. And over time, our sessions were almost planned by them. Have you ever thought of, can we have some garlic roast potatoes this week? Yeah, fine. We're happy to cook garlic roast potatoes. That was one of the children's favourite things.
Yeah.
And they'd never cooked it on a campfire before. So they got to do that.
Very nice. I think we'll wrap up there.
Okay.
Yeah, my camera's died.
Okay.
I wanted to say talk to me about newts because that was on the notes, but we can do that in the next one. We're losing sunlight out here.
Yeah, that's fine. We had a little catch up anyway.
We did have a little catch up, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this content over the next week.
Thanks again.
And then hopefully next week we'll get back and have another chat. We're now in the top 10% of podcasters. Woohoo! You've only got to do
Go Leafy Learning.
2 to do that, but hey ho. Right, say goodbye to everybody.
Bye.